Hey guys, I'm very excited that you're in class today, and I'm sure you are super excited you're in class with me also. Today, we are talking about motion. We started the concept of motion in our previous class, and we said that motion can be divided, or the study of motion can be divided into two basic subheadings, which are dynamics and kinematics. And we talked extensively on what dynamics is and the difference or the major difference between dynamics and kinematics. But for this lesson, what is our basic or our major focus? Our major focus will be to identify or describe the concept force, because understanding the concept of force will help our study of dynamics. Remember, dynamics is said to be the study of the motion of an object or objects with reference or recourse to the forces that led to such motion. What then is a force? The first thing I would like you to know that force could either be a push or a pull. Then what is the major reason for such a pull or a push? It is a push or a pull acting on an object as a result of its interaction with another object. For instance, let's say your car broke down. All right, you've seen that in most cases where a particular car will break down and the driver will be like, bro, please, can you just help me push this car? That is, help me add or apply an amount of force that would enable this car to move. Is that okay? So it is actually the push or a pull acting on an object as a result of the interaction between one object and the other. And in the case or the scenario I gave earlier about a broken down car and a person pushing, the interaction is between the vehicle and the person. Okay, now having said that, there are a number of forces that can be placed under two broad categories. Okay, the types of force that we have can be classified or categorized under two. The first one, which is the contact force, and the second one is the non-contact force. As the name implies, contact force. What is a contact force? A contact force is a force that finds expression or come into play when there is a point of contact between a particular object and another object. It is a force that requires the coming together of two surfaces or two or more surfaces so as to make a particular object to move. Now, we have various examples of contact force. We have different examples. So let us take some examples of contact force. The first example is the force of friction, or in some cases we call it frictional force. What then is a frictional force? A frictional force is the force that is exerted, look at my hand, it is exerted on or by a surface as an object moves across it. Okay, I see my hand, as an object moves across it. So the force that is experienced here is called the force of friction. And you would agree with me that it is a contact force because one surface is acting on another surface. Okay, now we can say that the aim of this force is to make an effort of making sure that these two surfaces slides or moves across each other. Don't worry, in one of our subsequent classes we'll discuss extensively on frictional force. In fact, it is a topic on its own. Okay, now but for the sake of this class, I'll just like to introduce it a little based on the concept we are talking about. So having said that, let us discuss another type of contact force. Another type of contact force is called the tension force. What then is a tension force? The tension force is the force that is transmitted through a string. Take note, it is transmitted through a string, rope, cable, or even wire. when it is pulled tight by forces acting from opposite ends. And most times, there was a scenario where I and my dad were trying to cover a particular surface with net, our fish pond actually, okay? Now what we did was, he applied a force on one end, and I did apply another force on the other end, okay? To make sure that the net is tensioned across the surface. I could remember I used this particular word, tension it from your end, okay? Do you understand? So we actually applied a force on the material, in this case, which was the net, okay? We applied a force, and that force was meant to tighten up the object. Another thing you should consider is that the forces are applied on opposite ends, okay? Now that is also an example of a contact force, because there was a contact between our ends and the objects, and even the surface upon which the net was to be applied. That is nice. The next example we are going to consider is the normal force. What then is a normal force? It is the support force, please take note, that is acted upon an object that is in contact with another stable object. For instance, let us take a book that is resting on a surface, okay? Consider your book now. You're writing, right? You're writing, you're jotting some things down, and you're making use of a book, okay? Now you place the book on the surface of your table, whatever you're using to write. Is that okay? Now the surface is exerting an upward force on the object or on the book. Is that okay? And what is the reason for this force, this upward force? It is so as to support the weight of the object on it. So the object is now in return acting, using or applying a downward force on the surface of the table, which is going to make both the surface of the table and the object placed on it to be at equilibrium. And that is why your book can rest on the surface of the table. Is that understood? All right, so another example, we have different examples. We have various examples, but because of our time, I will just highlight them for you. Now, another example is the applied force. And this is actually expatiated under the Newton's second law of motion. We'll talk about that also in one of our classes, okay? Now, other examples are forces due to air resistance. We also have examples like spring force. So just look around, make some analysis, and check which force requires a contact. Any force that requires a contact between two or more surfaces is actually called, or is actually studied under, the contact force. All right. Now, on the other hand, let us consider the force field or non-contact force. Non-contact force. So some textbooks call it force field, while some texts call it non-contact force. And the reason why they did that, of course, you know, because it does not deal with the coming together of surfaces, okay? They don't deal with contact between two or more surfaces. All right, so non-contact force. An example of non-contact force is the gravitational force. And of course, what is the gravitational force? Gravitational force is an attractive force, all right, which exists between or because of the attraction between two bodies. Let's say two or more bodies, by virtue of their masses. So that is what gravitational force is all about. It is either an attractive force or a repulsive force. All right. So that is one example of the non-contact force. You realize that there is no contact between the objects we are talking about, but it is the attraction is as a result of, by virtue of their masses. Okay. Another example is the electrical force. Electrical force is an interaction of either attractive force or repulsive force between two charged bodies. A common example of electric force is the electric circuit. We have charged bulbs. We have exertion of static friction, and so on and so forth. We can see all these as subsets of the electrical force. Another common example is the magnetic force. The magnetic force, as you all know, is defined as the attractive or repulsive force that is exerted between the poles of a magnet. Yeah, magnet from what? Magnetic, okay? The poles of a magnet and an electrically charged moving particles. All right, so these are common examples of non-contact force. So by now, I'm sure you should be able to confidently list some examples of contact force and some examples of non-contact force, as well as you should be able to identify the basic differences between the contact force and the non-contact force. And this is where we'll draw the curtain on this particular concept.